Hello Darklings! So this is another one of my special Halloween themed videos, and in this case I will be talking about kind of the nature of horror and terror. So this is kind of an interesting concept. Most of the videos I've been doing lately pertain specifically to horror movies. And every so often I have to step back and look at the different decades of horror and notice the trends. So what did we get in the 2000s? We had home invasion and cyberbullying and technologically themed ones. We had torture porn. We had all these very visceral type of fears. In the 90s, it ended up being highly psychological type of things. In the 80s, you had a lot of gross out factor things, including the zombie boom, the slasher boom, and the concept that there are mass killers out on the loose. In the 70s, you had that, but with more lurid elements instead of just straight up slasher. In the 60s, you had more ghost stories, you had more psychological things again. In the 50s, you have the Atom Age boom, you have a lot of giant monsters, you have a lot of things that have to do with radiation and communism and all of this Red Scare stuff. In the 40s, you kind of have a horror lull. You end up delving into the psyche a little bit, leaving the monster behind, but also how man is monster and all of this concept. And then the 30s is more or less purely monsters. And the 20s, which was still fairly new ground for horror, you end up having humans as monsters as well as truly supernatural, horrifying beings with no humanity in them at all. And of course, this is a very generalized type of observation, but typically, whenever a film comes out, you're looking at what was scaring people at the time. That's how you can kind of tell how successful it was. Some horror films that slipped under the radar, maybe they missed their mark. They weren't really banking on what people were scared of. And others, they have timeless classic quality to them, and there are things that people have always been scared of. But generally speaking, in the 1950s, watching them or The Blob or Godzilla, these are all atom age type of things. It's fear of radiation from the nuclear bomb fallout. It's thinking that all these unnatural things are going to happen, and you think that things are going to come from space. There's this big fear of alien life forms with the whole Area 51 and whatnot. I know in the 60s, a lot of the best horror movies that I can think of that came out of that time period were usually ghost stories, such as The Haunting, or had to do with the devil scare going into the beginning of the 70s with Rosemary's Baby and The Devil Rides Out and Witchfinder General, going into a lot of fear of witches and demons and demonology and all the occult having its own little revival, as though everybody in the early 70s suddenly discovered Crowley and demonology and everything all at the same time. This is kind of bouncing around a little bit, but it's kind of interesting to think of how people are affected and how people become scared and what unifying things scare everybody or enough of a population for a horror film to be made. I know that the home invasion film is a very popular one. It's one that I'm never terribly impressed by. I don't especially like it, but it does succeed in being scary and unnerving. When you have movies such as Funny Games and The Strangers, You're Next, The Purge, all breaking into people's homes when you least expect it, and basically it's something that can happen to anyone. And this kind of randomness, this inevitability, the very poignant line from The Strangers, "Why are you doing this? Because you were home," is a very difficult thing. It's terrifying to a lot of people. You end up having the slightly more unrealistic but still very, very terrifying and visceral torture porn series with Hostel and Saw that had its big boom in the mid-2000s. And then in the 90s, you have a lot of these very strange psychological thriller type things with Silence of the Lambs, Seven, Jacob's Ladder, where you get a lot of this trippy what is real, 12 Monkeys, and you get all these different things that even if they aren't purely horror, they still scare people because that's what people were going to be scared of. Or you have the masked killer fanatic boom of the 1980s with Freddy Krueger being the supernatural side of that, and in the dream realm, and then the slightly more visceral but still supernatural elements of Jason and Michael Myers, that it's just an unstoppable force that's going to keep coming after you, keep coming to kill you. And then you have the animal pictures, like the ones where you can get killer anything, from something that's campy and terrible and stupid, such as zombievers, back to the more blockbusting and serious threats of Jaws and Primeval and Lake Placid. And the idea of killer animals has always persisted because sometimes man likes to think that they're under the impression that they can control the natural world, and when it backlashes, oh, everybody's scared. Or there's the fear of the unknown and the what could that be. When you take the short story of Who Goes There and you adapt it into The Thing from Another World and John Carpenter's The Thing, and you end up getting this mystery, this fear of the unknown. For example, when I was a kid and I saw Signs, that movie was significantly scarier when you didn't see the ending, because you never saw the aliens up until the whole, bullshit twist. But it was scary because there was this fear of the unknown of what is going to happen, especially when you're 7. And yes, kids can be scared by things easier, but adults are still plenty scared by things because they've seen enough to know to be scared, if that makes sense. And out of this big wall of movies behind me, at least 2/3 of them are horror movies. I don't only watch horror movies, I just prefer to talk about them because they're my favorite. And it's kind of interesting because I don't have stuff that's just recent. I have stuff that goes back to the 1910s. And I just like to look at this wide range of why things were scary when. And of course, there are some of these stories that are classic and will either be developed more straight from their original material or through modern retellings, such as going from Frankenstein to Reanimator, and this big adjustment for the different time frames. And it's kind of interesting to see how filmmakers will play with classic stories and update them. For a video that I'll be doing at some point in time, I will cover such as the short story of Carmilla and its film adaptations, or The Legend of Bathory and the film adaptations based off of her character, or H.P. Lovecraft and all of the many things that science fiction and horror has taken from him, whether it's more direct things such as Reanimator, or the more looser, conceptually driven things such as Hellboy and In the Mouth of Madness and Event Horizon, and you can kind of get this feel of what terror is. And different writers have different concepts of terror, but all of them touch on people in some way or another, and whether it's the fear of the deep, like underwater, where you get films such as Sphere and The Abyss, and then you have fears about outer space where you get too many films to properly name and count, and you end up getting all these different approaches to what is basically the same common ground. And by this point, I guess there isn't a story that's original anymore. Everything's been done at least once, somewhere, somehow. Even if you aren't aware of it, something's been done before. I think originality is more in how you tell the story and how you approach the story. And in the case of horror, of what part of that is not just scaring you as the filmmaker, but scaring your audience with you. And even if it is just by grossing them out with things like a Sam Raimi or Lucio Fulci film, or if it's just trying to really, really badly fuck with their head, using body horror in a psychological context, such as a David Cronenberg film, there's all these different approaches to it. And I think that one of the things about the horror community is that, one, horror is a very broad genre. It covers supernatural thriller, it covers conventional thriller, it covers suspense, it covers psychological, it covers all kinds of different little subfacets. It's just kind of this big umbrella term that covers what are we scared of, or what will put your nerves on edge when you watch it, and what will keep you awake at night, and what are one of those things that will unsettle you. And I think that it awakens a lot more in people than some other genres of film. Sure, everybody likes a comedy now and then. Sure, everybody likes dramas and fantasy films. But when you can scare people, you have something that's a little bit more unifying than just wonder or depression, or something that's funny. People are usually scared by more of the same things than what people will find funny. What I will find funny is not necessarily what the next person will find funny, but people are more base unified by their fears. Why do you think you end up getting so many movies about spontaneous deaths, such as the Final Destination series, or you get films about things that everyone's scared of, such as the dark or spiders? And even if those are things that I'm not scared of, they scare enough of the population for it to be of use to make a film about it and scare the shit out of people, because people find catharsis in being scared by something on screen. It's a little easier to be scared by something that is not real than something that is, because sometimes that kind of escapism, it's like, if I get scared of this over here where it can't really harm me, then this other really, really real scary thing is slightly easier to deal with because I've exercised some of the terror, if that makes sense. I know I've definitely had some